Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This is the first technical meeting of the Climate Club third pillar, which is focusing on the financing for industry decarbonization. We have a very rich participation today, and thank you very much for that. We have representatives of the Climate Club member governments. We have international finance institutions, think tanks, and many other actors that are playing an important role in the industry decarbonization space, especially on the financing side. My name is Değer Saygun. I'm representing the Interim Secretariat from the OECD side. In the next slide, let me take you through today's agenda. Next slide, please. We have 1 hour, 45 minutes waiting for us to discuss this very important topic in the context of the decarbonization of the industry. After giving you the brief introduction, I will hand over to my colleague Philip Behrens from the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action of Germany. We'll listen to a keynote presentation from the OECD, followed by a panel discussion. You will have the opportunity to ask your questions to the panel through the chat function. So this is very much welcomed. I think you'll hear very interesting things today. Actually, real case studies, how industry is being financed across the world. Following that, we will have an introduction to the Climate Club Global Matchmaking Platform that is being developed jointly by the Climate Club and the UNIDO, so United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And following that, you will have the opportunity to raise a hand again and show yourselves to make any interventions from your countries, from your sectors about the industry decarbonization experiences, examples you have. So the objective of today's workshop is to understand how economic, financial, and de-risking instruments are being deployed, or what type of instruments we need in general to unlock private capital. And the discussion, as I mentioned in the very first words, is between the member governments of the Climate Club, but also the actors who will be financing the decarbonization of the industries in various economies. If you can look at the next slide, please. To recall where this work, today's technical meeting sits in the work program of the Climate Club. I'm mindful that we are joined by a lot of non-government organizations. So you might not be accustomed with the work program of the Climate Club, but I encourage you to check that on the webpage. The work program of the Climate Club has been approved by the 38 members end of last year, just before Climate Club was officially launched on the 1st of December at COP. And the third pillar of the Climate Club is actually focusing on enabling cooperation, boosting cooperation and partnerships at the international level, with the principle of the Climate Club being an inclusive, high-level, ambitious global platform for industry decarbonization. And within that third pillar, we have a specific activity, which you see here, focusing on understanding how different financing instruments and the overall enabling environment can be improved to mobilize private capital. This is an activity that will be running throughout the year. We are working with sectors, predominantly steel and cement, and engaging emerging and developing economies to the work to be able to understand how financing is actually being done, where the needs and gaps are, and how that can be improved to close the investment gap. Let's look at the next slide, and I'll share with you a bit more about what you can expect throughout this year as outputs of this Pillar 3 activity. This work or this activity is very much benefiting from the technical inputs of the OECD, and my colleague Joseph Cordonier will be presenting on it in a second, where the OECD team here is engaging with the cement and steel industries to collect evidence, experiences how financing is being done. There is a big engagement with emerging economies, which also includes Climate Club members, notably Egypt, Indonesia, and Thailand, collecting sector-specific at country level examples and developing also solutions for how the financing and the overall investment conditions can be improved for mobilizing private capital. This is the first workshop. There will be a second one in fall this year. In parallel, based on the learnings we are collecting from here, we are going to develop a capacity building program that will then be implemented as part of the work next year of the Climate Club. And all this is feeding into the global matchmaking platform, which my colleagues from the UNIDO will be presenting later today on what that platform looks like. Now let's look at the next slide, please. And I hand over to my colleague, Dr. Philipp Behrens from the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action of Germany to deliver his opening remarks. Philipp, please.
Yes, dear. Thank you so much for setting the scene. I hope that you can all hear me clearly. Welcome to everyone from my side as well. I'm Philipp Behrens. I'm heading the division which is in charge of the International Climate Initiative, the ICI, within the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, the BMWA. It's great to see so many people joining this workshop today because we think this issue is really important. Decarbonization of industries is crucial if we want to successfully implement the Paris Agreement. And I think that we all know that the emissions from industry will grow substantially, especially in emerging and developing economies. And industrial emissions have risen already by around 70% since 2000 as a result of increasing global demand for industrial goods, representing around 15% global GHG emissions. Germany is committed to accelerating decarbonization of industry, and it is one of the highest priority of our government. It's our goal that the industry to transform to a net zero pathway and at the same time stay economically successful. And this is a goal that we share with many other countries, especially the members of the Climate Club. As you know, and yes,
Philipp, we lost you for 10 seconds. We lost you. Yeah.
You lost me? Shall I maybe turn off the video to make it?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Philipp. Please go ahead. It's much better already. Thank you.
Okay. I continue with mentioning that this issue is crucial for us in Germany because we want to transform our industry, and at the same time we want to make sure that this industry remains economically successful. And that is something that we share with many other countries and with all of the countries which have joined the Climate Club. And Dare has already explained that Pillar 3 is essentially on cooperation. It offers us and its members the opportunity to learn from each other and also support each other. One important element of Pillar 3 is the Global Matchmaking Platform, the GMP. And the International Climate Initiative, we can be supporting the GMP and especially UNIDO as its secretary. The idea of the Global Matchmaking Platform is to matchmake government requests with available offer of technical and financial assistance to align industry with the it is supposed to function at the intersection of financing, technology, policy, and implementation, with the aim to catalyze decarbonization efforts in heavy industries across markets. What creates robust and relevant conditions to scale technological solutions and to support the development of emerging technologies. One crucial opportunity for a clear towards is the next NDC cycle. Before COP30 in the next year, 2025, all parties of the Paris Agreement need to submit new NDCs with concrete targets for the period from 25 to 30. And these NDCs should include ambitious and robust chapters on industry and the mid and long-term planning. And actions required for industrial decarbonization should be defined there in these instruments. And for these new NDCs, especially the developing countries and emerging economies need to receive support. And this could be, for example, offered via the GMP of the climate club. The idea of the GMP is not to set up a completely new support infrastructure, but to utilize the strength of international partnerships, as well as especially existing and potentially also new instruments to deploy resources at speed and scale. I can say that I'm very much looking forward to learning more about existing financial instruments here in this workshop for industrial decarbonization. Dialogues like the one we're having now today, that bring different areas to learn and collaborate with each other and ensure our efforts are aligned. And today's event is an opportunity for us to better understand and learn about how to use the financial resources effectively, how to create enabling conditions and accelerate financial flows, scale successful approaches and financial instruments, and ensure the engagement and investments of private sector for the transformation by leveraging public investments. Governments from support of the international community, even more to unlock private sector capital and finance and scale the deployment of low carbon technologies. The international community will need to work with governments to identify measures and incentives to bring in private sector finance and to ensure confidence for private sector actors with targeted policy making. And today we have come to listen to available solutions which we could hopefully further support with collective efforts to unlock private investments in industrial decarbonization. Let me thank the Climate Club Interim Secretariat for organizing this important technical dialogue, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentation coming now, but also to the discussion on how we can scale up the existing instruments. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Philip. I read the comments from the audience. We will be sharing with you the remarks delivered by Philip. So you have access to that because I'm aware that not all has been heard. Apologies for that from our side, but for the rest of the discussion, I think the quality will be better. Now, I turn over to my colleague from the OECD, Joseph Cordonnier, to deliver his presentation on the study OECD has released at the end of last year, I think, about the financing industry decarbonization examples and solutions. Please, Joseph.
Thank you, Dea. So if we may go to the next slide. So this keynote presentation is on the report released in November last year on financing solutions to foster industrial decarbonization with a focus on emerging and developing economies. So this report is a complement to the OECD framework for industry's net zero transition, which is a methodology through which the OECD aims to support large emerging economies in decarbonizing certain sectors of their industry. The report provides a theoretical framework or overview of the financial challenges to scale up investment for industry decarbonization. And it also highlights several instruments that are actually already available and implemented that can help address some of these barriers. So going to the next slides, the rationale for us to focus on the industry sector at the OECD is also that the industry sector is key in order to achieve net zero emissions and to remain consistent with net zero pathways. And yet, the level of investment that we observe today remains much below what is required to achieve net zero emissions, both for the targets in 2050 and the investment required by that date, but also for the interim milestones in 2030. And this poses particular challenges, notably because of the long lifetime of industrial assets which require to invest in the next decade in order to abate emissions. So maybe two main numbers or elements on these slides. The first line shows the level of investment in new production plants aligned with net zero pathways, focusing on few hard to abate sectors, where you can see that we need to increase this amount by 5 by 2030 in order to remain consistent with the climate objective of the Paris Agreement. And the second line shows as well the energy-related investment for the decarbonization of the industry sector, as industry cannot be understood only as single plants and manufacturing plants, but we have to consider the entire value chain. And also for this energy-related investment, we need to see this double in the next decade and triple by 2050. If we move to the next slide. Yeah, so here we can see what was our approach in order to structure the challenge of financing industry decarbonization. So we built, as mentioned, on our framework for industry's net zero transition, where we have two main deliverables. The first one is putting in place or proposing recommendations on policies, regulations, and skills in order to improve the enabling conditions, so how to strengthen the environment for investments in emerging and developing countries, although most of these recommendations are also valid for developed countries. And the second set of solutions is to identify which financial solutions, instrument mechanisms can actually help improve competitiveness of low carbon technologies. And this second part is what is at the core of today's discussion and also represents our technical inputs to the Pillar 3 of the Climate Club. So what you can see in the chart here is a simplified value chain of the industry sector, where you can see that this starts from energy and raw materials, going then through production process, the use of products, also the end of life and recycling, in order to also relieve the pressure on raw materials and resources. And each step of this value chain faces very different challenge. So for instance, on the upstream part, we can see that many of the low carbon technologies face high upfront costs, which in turn has a huge impact, especially in developing countries due to the cost of capital, which hinder the competitiveness of such technologies. But even for technologies that are available and are competitive, there can be specific challenges depending on the country, the sector, the technologies, for instance, related to the access to financing. As we go then a bit downstream in the value chain, we can see, for instance, that higher cost of operations also play a huge role. So it's not only an investment issue, but also a competitiveness issue during the lifetime of the assets. And at the product stage of the value chain, the volume and revenue uncertainty play also a major role, or can be a major barrier. And this is what we observe, for instance, when we talk about green steel or green cement and how to develop demand and develop the market for such products. So going to the next slide, we can also observe how we provided analysis in order to show how different de-risking and financing instruments can help overcome these specific barriers at different stages of the value chain. We have observed in our research that currently most of the available instruments that are being implemented focus on the upstream part of the value chain, with a bit less focus now on the product use and end-of-life stages. And another key element for us is that there is a huge diversity of instruments that are available, and we should use them in a tailored way in order to address specific barriers of each project. And this depends on the sector, but also on the specific technologies, geography, etc. In addition, industrial projects are often complex, in which case combining several of these instruments in such projects can make sense. So for instance, combining guarantee instruments together with financing instruments, but also technical assistance can prove very successful in several cases. So moving to the next slides. So this first part was mostly theoretical, and this was a way for us to categorize a bit the barriers and potential instruments. But we also made the link with existing projects that we observed in real life, and to illustrate through projects that have reached final decisions, final investment decisions, projects that are operational, as well as available funding instrument, financing instruments in the market, how this was actually implemented in practice. So we have collected so far more than 20 case studies, and we continue developing that work both through OECD and Climate Club. And we'll have the chance in today's panel to have very concrete examples, some of them being as well featured in our report, and some of them being new ones that we will develop this year. So going to the next slide, to conclude on this, just high-level learnings from all these case studies that we have developed before we move to the panel discussions. So the first key learning for us was on the characteristics of financing instruments. So we have seen that there were a lot of direct public support, and also based on OECD work on blended finance, we recommend to have this for targeted or time-bound uses in order to help develop a market or to help develop a specific sector. And we can use that, we can observe that there is as well a wish to further develop de-risking instruments in order to optimize the leverage of public resources, so to increase private capital mobilization. But what we have observed is that these de-risking instruments so far focus mostly on technologies that are very close to commercial maturity. Then on the governance and implementation of instruments, we have seen as well that having knowledge sharing and matchmaking platform can be useful. A major barrier, especially in emerging and developing economies, that was highlighted by several financial institutions, was the difficulty to source quality projects. And a multi-stakeholder approach is very often useful, first to build on the capabilities of various institutions, but also, for instance, to help channel international funding to domestic end users and beneficiaries. The third thing was on, or the third key learning was on enabling conditions. So even though the focus today and the focus of our paper is a lot on financing solutions, it usually only comes if many enabling conditions are already in place. So here we have highlighted in the case studies the need for capacity building, which is actually something that will be undertaken as well as part of the Climate Club Pillar 3 work. And we have also received many feedback that unified sustainable taxonomies or green taxonomies are useful in the sense that it provides comfort to investors that their investment is also recognized as green or contributing to the decarbonization of the industry sector. And maybe the last learning, which is on replicability and scale-up. We have seen so far many instruments, but only a few of them have already been replicated because most of them are quite new. And therefore, for many innovative financing instruments that are being discussed lately, for instance, carbon contract for difference, this is still at very early stages, and the conditions for the replicability is still being discussed. We also hope that today will provide the opportunity to discuss this possibility to replicate successful financial instruments further. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to present. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A in the Zoom link.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Very interesting and helpful technical input from the OECD to the Climate Club work. You will have the opportunity to ask any questions to Joseph, but I'd like to move on with the panel. And after the panel, we will be welcoming any of your questions and comments. And with this, I would like to ask to go to the next slide and introduce you our 5 panelists. As we will be hearing different case studies from the industry and financial stakeholders. And in the next slide, please, if I may briefly introduce our very valuable panelist, Matthias Wojtok from the European Investment Bank. He is the head of structured finance for North, Central, and Southeast Europe. Louise Tem Kjølholm is from the Export and Investment Fund of Denmark and the Chief ESG Advisor. Christian Gisler from the Inter-American Development Bank, he's a lead energy specialist there. Femi Akinrebio from the IFC, the Global Manager for Manufacturing, Investment and Trade Supplier Finance. And finally, Per Gebauer from the Mitigation Action Facility as an advisor. We'll be first hearing from Matthias, so the European Investment Bank, and I hand over to you for your presentation. Please also inform us so we just move on with the next slide. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you very much. I hope that the sound issues will be solved and that basically the broadband network of Luxembourg is beating the one of Germany. Sorry for the silly one. Okay, now we talk about actually H2 Green Steel, which is probably one of the most meaningful transactions that I had the honor to follow in European Investment Bank, and which is spot on actually the target of our discussion round. So to see how you can best decarbonize hard to abate parts of the industries, and especially there where it really makes a difference. It is a very peculiar case, and it's a very singular case. And I will come down to that, and maybe I start with the first slide because we had this format actually given. I would not have started with an organizational chart, but just to give you an overview of the transaction, we have H2 Green Steel, which essentially is a 6 billion startup, creating a close to fully decarbonized steel making facility. We come to a couple of details, a lot of details actually later. Quintessentially, the customer opted for a project finance non-recourse way of financing this investment, which is of course not particularly common for industrial investments. But I also need to say, based on what we have seen in previous transactions, and probably based also on the predecessors, sort of also from the same shareholder group, so Northvolt, the European Battery Initiative there, that has become more or less like a blueprint on how to go for big green investments, because they are step-up investments, they are massive, difficult to support by existing balance sheets, and they are in quite some ways also like countering, let's say, incumbents that are in the market. So here we have like an initiative which is really targeting a greenfield investment and really just jumping all the test phases and just directly going to industrial rollout. There's two key elements there that are important. So you have a large commercial bank community which is actually joining the financing, and together with EIB, and EIB being then the one that is acting together with other banks as like anchor investor, pathfinder, and so on and so on. And of course, in terms of risk taking, you have like a publicly driven institutions with Riksgälden, so the Swedish National Debt Office, and Euler Hermes, which are both taking a significant chunk of like the cash exposure risk to the facility, to the project itself. The project itself, of course, has multiple interface risks, and you see like from the lists of participants there that, I mean, you have like it's like the who is who in European industry, and pretty much driven by technical competences, relationship issues, of course, and the necessity to have partners on the boat who basically really are in a position to react to anything that comes across this type of projects through their lifetime. When we go to the next slide, please. As said before, at European Investment Bank, we used the Invest EU facility for that. So that is like a facility which is backed by the EU budget, which allows us to take significantly more amounts of risks when it comes to this type of enterprises. And it is true that from the pure risk perspective, this is probably one of the most risky things that EIB has undertaken in terms of, let's say, technology risk, construction risk, afterwards, like the operational risks that are associated to all these kind of things. Of course, like the offtake risks, the price risks, and we come to that later, the regulatory risks. So in total, 6.5 billion project cost, and with a 4.2 billion roughly debt financing. And the project is currently under construction, so it's quite impressive to see. I mean, whoever is present on social media, of course, sees on LinkedIn actually progress of the transaction quite quickly and quite impressively, and well documented, which is of course not always the case for this type of projects. EIB provides 340 million, 200 million as a direct loan on the InvestEU, so fully exposed to all project risks, which is like the most significant at-risk lender of the commercial bank, so it's roughly 50% of the at-risk tranches. And as we said before, we have steel making in front of us, so basically a combined green H2 production with then a direct reduction plant for the production of raw iron, and then electric arc furnaces to go for the finished steel products then. Next slide, please. I think I just want not to repeat things that we have said before, but maybe, and that is really important, to just emphasize this participation, joint participation of public sector driven risk-taking capacity and commercial lenders, and EIB being like somewhere between, being of course a policy and policy-driven institution, but applying the full set of project finance related due diligence to this type of investments. And that is, I think, highly important, because we are venturing into territories with these investments that are quite peculiar, that are like on the forefront of things, that will face troubles ahead, which we will need to foresee to the extent possible. And I think the level of due diligence, the level of confidence that we can create in this project is quintessential for them to move ahead. And of course, I mean, the classical project finance structure is maybe not like it's not something that naturally comes to your mind when it comes to steel industry, but there's a couple of elements when they come together that actually show that it is potentially one of the easiest ones to basically implement in a short time frame in larger amounts, if and when, of course, the plan and the structure and the product is adapted to the market. Next slide, please. As said, we have a fully integrated, digitalized and circular green steel plant. 2.5 million tons annual green steel production is not particularly super big, but it's like the average size of a steel production plant in Europe. The important thing is 95% of CO2 emission reduction through full electrification. 700 megawatts of green hydrogen production. So actually that means that we have hydrogen produced 24/7 with 99% green energy. That is a very peculiar setup, and I come to that maybe in the next point, because of course in order to have this type of things you need to have the green energy, otherwise the whole thing is just pointless, and you need to have it at a price point which makes the project competitive and which makes an economic case afterwards in order to go for that. You absolutely need to have a strong investor base, so equity investors and key industrials that both act as investors and off-takers. And I think the off-take side is maybe the most important one there, because what we have seen is that of course you cannot enter into a project finance transaction if you don't have like the main parameters of your future cash flows somehow nailed down, and these are driven by off-takes indeed. And we see that we have a price premium for this particular product, so the green steel product, of about 20 to 30%, which is contracted mainly by OEMs, European OEMs, car manufacturers, but also white good producers and others who are actually in need of this type of product, in order to showcase that their business line becomes sustainable, becomes also like long-term green and credibly long-term green. I think this is in particular for the car industry. I think it's one of the key challenges for the future. Next slide, please. Oh, that does not look at all like the slide that I had before. It looks a little bit out of the. But there's no, go back. There's like, even to the one which does not look like. No. It is like down basically, the last one. We go to my last one. One more. That's the one. We stay here. It's a little. It has just a little bit of a different layout. I think some remarks we hinted to the bullet point 3 already. So the offtakes as being important. Bullet point 4, the renewable energy is being super important, and there are historical reasons why you have in the S1 price zone in North Sweden actually this huge overhang of renewable energy capacity. Being historically driven since 100 years by the development of watercraft there, water energy, and more recently by the addition of wind, which allows it to be base load compatible. You have base load compatible green energy, which allows you to basically size down your electrolyzers by about 50% as compared to if you use only green electricity if and when available. It allows you to optimize the whole investment process, actually, and to reduce that and come up with a product which is still more expensive than the base one. But you have seen that the offtakes being 20 to 30% more higher in price than compared to brown steel, they actually balance that thing out. The offtake is though driven, and that is coming down to the first bullet point, by two things, which is taxonomy, regulatory support. Let's face it, I mean, if we would not have our taxonomy, EU taxonomy in place, there would not be an incentive to actually go for this type of green products. And this, I think, is a very much important thing, because if you look at it, and despite all the distortions that you might have in these markets, taxonomy combined with CBAM is probably as close as we can get in terms of European industrial policy. Okay, the other points, they're relatively minor, even though they are of course important. And what makes a real particularity out of the project is like access to the infrastructures, maybe it's ports, rail, roads, and so on, and of course the partners that they have locally there. Meaning that it's a lighthouse project.
Matthias, sorry to interrupt.
Let me just finish. Yep.
Yeah,
I just this is really my last sentence.
Oh, great!
It is a lighthouse project, but as a matter of fact, it had a super point of chance to be having all the elements at one place, and we are very lucky to support it at this one place. And hopefully, we can draw some lessons from it. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much, Matthias. Sorry to interrupt. This was very, very helpful. There's a few questions which are coming along the way. We'll come back to you in the discussion session. I'll like to invite Louise now for the presentation from the Export and Investment Fund of Denmark. Please, Louise.
Yeah, hi. I will do a short 5 minutes presentation.
Okay.
And IFO is the Danish Export Credit Agency, where I work as a chief ESG advisor, and my background is an environmental engineer background. So I might not be the most, if there's questions on the finance, I will try to answer them. Please, next slide. In 2022, IFO was involved in a finance where we supported the Danish exporter FLSmidth. And it is a project in Ghana where CBI have an existing cement plant, and that was going to be expanded with a new grinding mill from FLSmidth and a calcination unit. And we gave a biocredit to Société Générale, who was providing a loan for the project. Next slide. And as I mentioned, it was a biocredit on $42 million US. So far, 95% of the loan is paid to CBI. The status of the project is that it's under construction and will be completed in 2024. So it's still the old plant that is in operation. Next slide. Thank you. The previous, was that the next one? Yeah. Yeah, and the equipment from FLSmidth is a cement crusher and a clay calcinizer, and the whole the new technology in this project is the clay calcinizer, which make it possible for CBI to use up to 20% of local sourced clay instead of importing cement. And that means that they can reduce the CO2 emission by 20%, as there are less carbonates in the local source clay, and also the calcinating process also require less energy consumption compared to a normal typical clinker production. And we make sure that this loan was aligned with EU taxonomy, and that they were living up to IFC performance standard and World Bank EHS guidelines for cement and lime industry. And we have made an ESAP, an environmental and social action plan, where we ensure that the requirements in order to achieve continuous alignment with these framework are listed. So then the impact of the implemented project is that the biocredit gives the opportunity to a low carbon technology, so we can support the Danish exporter in their exports to the foreign market. And as well, it is also an economic benefit for Ghana, as they can use more local sourced material and have more local labor involved and reduce the import of clinker and lower their total CO2 footprint for the country. So what are the lessons learned? Yeah, that looks a different also for what I've seen, but the biocredit structures make it possible for CBI to assess an attractive long-term finance, and it's highly replicable biocredit and can be implemented in different regions, sectors, and industry. And it's a great instrument for ensuring decarbonizing projects which normally are quite expensive. Yeah. I think that was it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Louise, this was very helpful and a very specific example also, from a developing economy case study. So I'm sure there will be interest for this from the audience to learn more, and I will come back to you later also with a question. Thank you for that. And I'd like to move on with Christian. So Inter-American Development Bank's presentation and example. And Christian, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you to the OECD, to the Climate Club for this invitation. So let's go directly to the next one, please. So why is this important in Latin America and the Caribbean? Mainly because industry is emitting around 20% of all the emissions in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we need to do specific programs for this sector. Next one, please. So just to summarize a little bit, what are the things that can be done? And this, my predecessors were eloquent in talking about this. Essentially, we have 4, perhaps 5 technical methods in order to decrease decarbonization. The first one is energy efficiency. The second one is electrifying processes. The third is using hydrogen or derivatives in the process. The fourth is carbon capture, utilization and storage. And the fifth probably is solutions based on nature, which is basically offsets of forests and so on. So having that range of alternatives, we need to find how to finance them. So the appetite in Latin America, it's a bit less obvious than in Europe. So we need to try to get other instruments in order to make it work. So the other instruments is that we work a lot with climate funds, such as IKI, NAMA, the CTF, the Global Environmental Facility, the Green Climate Fund. These are all funds that are accessible to the Inter-American Development Bank and other multilaterals. So we use them in order to mitigate risk and also attract private sector capital. So what we do here is we use climate funds in this scheme here. The funds go through the IDB, and then we work with a local second-tier development bank in a country of Latin America. Most probably, this is a proposal, or this figure is struck from a proposal that we presented for Mexico and Brazil. So in these cases, the local development banks could be BNDES in Brazil and NAFIN in Mexico. So they will on lend this to let's say an entity. Now, this entity, we want this to be a small and medium price enterprise entity. That entity would develop or will develop innovation in terms of industrial decarbonization. So let's say this entity is developing a new burner for hydrogen production that will be used in a smelter in a furnace in steel or cement. So the first thing we want is that whatever is if this burner is successful, we want enterprise from the steel manufacturer or cement manufacturer to be actually purchasing this equipment. So that's a condition for this to work. In case the burner is actually working well, successful, so we have KPIs for that part. If it doesn't work well, and here's where the beauty of the climate funds come in, for whatever reason, scalability, even price, doesn't work well, then the climate funds are not repaid. So it becomes a contingent recovery grant. But in case it is repaid, so it is successful, it has to be paid back by the partner company who will purchase the equipment. So once this happens, we believe that this model can be replicated through other companies in that country and in the region. So let's go to the next one. So as I said below, this is a combination of grants to enable the framework, essentially, contingent recovery grants. These are the ones from the climate funds that we use them in this contingent way that if it works, then you need to repay me. If it doesn't, then it remains as a non-reimbursable grant. And if we want to scale it up, we use our own ordinary capital blended with grants to make a blended finance. So to decrease the cost of the loan, let's say, in order to replicate this achievement. So the status is basically we have applied to several climate funds to do this endeavor. We are at the moment using between 20 to 40 million euros in climate funds. Probably another 70 to 150 million will come from the Clean Technology Fund and other climate funds. So that is coming, and that's only in the contingent recovery part, which will be coupled with ordinary capital and private sector investment. Also, I forgot to mention that this endeavor, we also do it in a matching grant facility. So we put 50% of the funding, and the other 50% comes from a steel manufacturer, a cement manufacturer, and so on. So we divide a little more the risk in this. Where we can deploy these mechanisms in steel, aluminum, pulp and paper, automotive part, fertilizers, mainly Mexico and Brazil, but we will probably open this to Colombia, Chile, Argentina in the coming future. Next one, please. So a bit of what I mentioned before, the scope is the same, the countries that I mentioned before. At this time, we're piloting these possibilities of financing. We don't have specific results as yet, but we are looking forward to, we are actually working with unions of, not unions, but associations of cement industries in Latin America, steel industries in Latin America, also pulp and paper, and aluminum. Next one, please. So where we are with the project right now, so we are working in these hard to abate sectors. We are adopting policies to decarbonize in the region. So we work on the regulatory part, and we are testing mechanisms such as the one that I showed, also apply to the CBAM and aligning to the MRV systems that are currently used in Europe. So that the steel or the aluminum or the cement that is being produced in Latin America can be exported with low carbon intensity to Europe. Next one, please. So lessons learned. Well, there are multi-faceted, conditions that we need to deal with. We have to adapt the programs and the monies in order to the context of Latin America, which is way different from Europe. But we believe that with a model like this, we can replicate it and eventually scale it up. Next one, please. So just the one before. There you go. So thank you again for your attention. These are 4 publications that I leave for your reference. And the third one is, unfortunately, is in Spanish. The other 3 are in English, but this is basically what we are doing in terms of decarbonization in Latin America of the industry, and what are we planning for hydrogen production and derivatives for the industry. Thank you again for the opportunity, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Very, very interesting, especially that you mentioned the blended finance as an example. We already have one question for you, but I'll raise that when the panel is over. And I'd like to turn to Femi from the IFC, because he has a number of examples he wants to share with you today based on their experiences. And I hand over to you, Femi, please.
No, thank you, and many thanks to the OECD and the Climate Club for this invitation. So we've been spending a lot of time thinking through what we can do for industrial decarbonization, and especially when it comes to the hard-to-abate sector of steel, cement, petrochemicals, and similar industries. I'm going to share with you today 2 examples of how we can use financial structure to incentivize the right behavior to decarbonize and push the climate agenda forward. Let's go to the first slide. So my first slide will present the structure for how we use sustainability-linked financing to incentivize the right behavior and to push the agenda for decarbonization in the hard-to-abate sector. This typical structure we've used many, many times. I'm going to present a specific example to you today, but the key structure here is we use the spread and the interest on a financial instrument as an incentive to encourage the climate agenda. So we have the structure where we can step up or we can step down. So it could be the case that if certain milestones are met, we reduce the interest rate. If the milestones are not met, we increase the interest rate. Or it could just work in one direction. It depends, right? What are the elements required to do this? We need to have very clear sustainability framework. Where the IFC comes in this case is that we can support the clients in developing the framework if the framework is not existing. But we need to have targets that are measurable and that can be recorded and be reported, because that will be essential. So in terms of the elements that are required, you need to have targets, and the target needs to be verifiable. And ex-ante, we need to have a second party opinion to codify what needs to be done and the benchmark that is going to be followed. And then after the fact, we need to have a way of monitoring to see if the targets are achieved and to be able to report back on them. And the money can be used for general purposes in the case of when we do sustainability link loan. In this case, we don't do this alone. In many occasions, we do bring our partner DFIs along, and we can bring commercial bank along, and we can do all the monitoring and report to all the parties that are involved in the financing. Let's go to the next slide. So in this case, the example we have is the work we are doing with our partner, Votorantim, in Brazil. So for this instrument, it is operational. We're already using it in many situations. And as at the last count in FY23, IFC for its own account has deployed more than $2.5 billion. Okay. And when it comes to specific sustainability bond, we've done like $500 million already. And this can be applied in many of the sectors that I mentioned. Could it be cement, could it be steel, could it be glass, could it be aluminum? Each of those sectors can actually use this. So let's go to the next slide. In the case of Votorantim, the company has very clear targets. They have an ambition for what they need to get to in terms of sustainability. And the instrument we designed for them was focused on getting them to deploy the machinery and the technology to use alternate fuel. In this case, they increased the use of refuse-derived fuel. They put co-processing machines to process refuse and use it instead of burning fossil fuel. ISA provided $150 million. And in terms of how this would incentivize the behavior, the monitoring level, the target is the carbon emission that is being reduced as a result of the use of this structure. Let's go to the next slide. So what are the impacts of the structure that we put together for this client? The client is doubling its use of alternate fuel. Okay, so currently at 34%, they're going to take it to close to 70% and more. And the overall project is going to bring about a significant reduction in the use of fossil fuel, and as a result, a significant reduction in carbon emission. And the whole idea is to support the company to move very close to the target for 2030. They already have a pathway they committed to, which is in line with what the Global Cement and Concrete Association put forward in terms of the roadmap for decarbonizing cement. And this is going to help them in getting to that. Let's go to the next slide, which I think we can skip through quickly so that we can go to the next one. So in terms of lessons, so the use of sustainability linked loan in cement in the hard to abate sector is something that has been demonstrated. We have a credible way of monitoring what the impact of this financing instrument it takes, and then we can monitor the carbon emission, which is in line with industry expectation for the pathway for decarbonizing cement. Let's go to the next one. Here we talk about a slightly different instrument. And this instrument is similar to what my colleague on the IDB side mentioned when he talked about specifically the case of conditional grants. In this case, we use commercial money and concessional funding, and we blend it together to incentivize a client to then take on a project that has sustainability impact. Okay. In many cases, it could be the case that the project has viability gap, and the blending would help in ensuring that the viability gap is bridged. Or it could be that the demonstration of the technology itself is in doubt and it is not clear if it's going to work or it's not going to work. Or are we sure it's going to be optimal or not going to be optimal? Blending kind of allows the opportunity to get a client to make a decision to pursue a project that otherwise might probably not happen. Let's go to the next slide. So between FY10 and FY23, which is the last fiscal year for us, IFC has deployed $4.7 billion in blended finance, which are situations where commercial money is paired with concessional financing to get to a project funding. And this instrument could either be a concessional loan, it could be a quasi-equity that is taking a risk that is different from what the commercial money is taking. It could be pure equity, and this can actually be done in the form of a guarantee, or sometimes it could even be a conditional grant. It's an instrument that we've used in many situations, and we continue to use it across our industry. Let's go to the next slide. So in this case, we apply this in Nigeria for a client in the petrochemical industry, in Indorama Element Petrochemical. And the real application is to use heat recovery as a way of ensuring improvement in energy efficiency for the company. Okay, and as a result, we get to a situation whereby the use of fossil fuel is significantly reduced and the energy efficiency of the overall plant is increased. The total project is about $71 to $75 million. IC provided $9 million of concessional financing and commercial money of about $6 million. And the overall idea for this is to blend this combination in a way that it gives the client the incentive to get to the commercial level at which this project becomes a viable option. Let's go to the next slide. So what is the impact of the project? The implementation of this project, which is just about $75 million, is going to result in reduction of 220 kilotons of CO2 per year. And we use the project to serve as a demonstration of what can be done in the petrochemical industry to increase energy efficiency, predominantly with the use of heat recovery, heat waste recovery, and applying that as a way of reducing fossil fuel consumption in plants. Let's go to the next slide, which I think is the final slide. So, in whole, blended finance is an instrument that IFC is going to be using more and more when it comes to the hard-to-abate sector and on the climate agenda, because the challenge of deploying the solution we have today is that many of them are not commercially viable. And the viability gap goes from being very large to very small, right? If we can apply this, we can basically incentivize the adoption of new technology or the use of existing technology that are not considered to be commercially viable today. I'll be happy to take questions, but I'll stop here just to be on time.
Thank you, Femi. These two examples, distinct in character, but very helpful, and we see obviously an increasing role for sustainability-linked finance frameworks, but also your example on the concessional finance and blended finance was very interesting and very helpful. I'm sure there will be lots of interest to both examples. Now, I'd like to go to our last panelist from the Mitigation Action Facility. Per, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So thanks for inviting the Mitigation Action Facility to this event, both the OECD, of course, and also the Climate Club. Maybe before I start, I would say a few words to the Mitigation Action Facility itself. The Mitigation Action Facility is a multi-donor fund that basically provides transitional climate action projects with funding. And what is important to understand is that we basically provide our funding to the countries on a grants based. And the funding then is being applied to technical assistance on the one side and also for climate finance on the other side. So maybe you should, show the next slide. Thank you so much. So here we basically have a practical example of how our funds can be used in financial instruments. And the example here is taken from a project in Thailand that promoted climate-friendly cooling technologies and that had a special focus on domestic and commercial refrigerators, air conditioners and chillers. And as you can see here, our funding was channeled through the Electricity Generating Authority of Thailand, in short EGAT. And EGAT then in turn provided investment subsidies of euro 3 million to refrigeration and air conditioning manufacturers, so-called RAC manufacturers. And the funding was then basically for the conversion of their production lines for the manufacture of energy efficient cooling systems and the use of natural refrigerants in commercial refrigeration. And then some of the funding also went to support the establishment of public training centers. In addition, there was a revolving fund, as you can see, of about 5.2 million euros with 0% interest, and that was set up to provide loans to RAC manufacturers and retailers for the conversion of production lines and also for market introduction activities, allowing the end users then to purchase refrigeration equipment on loan with 0% interest. Next slide. Yeah, here as you can see and as mentioned, in our example, the used financial instruments were grants and concessional loans with 0% interest. The project was already completed in the mid of 2021 and a total of 143 million euros of private finance were mobilized during project implementation. The total funding under the financial component was 8.3 million euros, out of which 3 million was the grant and euro 5.3 million for the revolving fund. And the funding for the revolving fund has been repaid in full and then was transformed into the now Cooling Innovation Fund. Next slide, thank you. So as you can see here, the regional focus was basically on Thailand, but the impact of the project was far beyond Thailand, as Thailand is the second largest producer of RAC equipment in the world behind China, with approximately 9 billion in exports. So as mentioned before, the project had a technical and a financial component, and the total funding was euro 14.7 million. Next slide. No, not next slide, sorry. As you can see here, go back, yes. So what is important in our methodology, the implementation organizations, they are fully responsible for project implementation. And here in this case, the implementing agency was the German Development Corporation, GIZ. And project implementation takes place in two phases. There is an initial phase that basically sets up all the contractual arrangements for the technical component as well as for the financial component, and also agrees on certain milestones that have to be achieved. And then there is the actual implementation phase where basically the financial mechanism is launched and the accompanying technical assistance measures are being implemented. Projects can apply for funding if they are eligible for ODA finance and implemented in one of our priority sectors, which is, as mentioned, the energy sector, on the transport sector, or the industry sector, or cross-cutting. And projects need to be aligned with the Paris Agreement goals, that means with the NDCs and the long-term strategies of the country. And they also need to leverage additional public and or private investments. And finally, they need to have an intersectional understanding of gender and social inclusion. Next slide, please. So what were the impact of the project? So in this case, the project mobilized euro 143 million in private contributions and mitigated 1.05 million tons of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases. In total, there were 10 refrigeration and air conditioning manufacturers supported that provided more than 270,000 of units of green cooling technologies, and that represented a market share of over 20%. Next slide, please. So what were the lessons learned? So first of all, it's important that financial instruments need to be well suited and designed to address the barriers identified. And to the extent possible, complexity should be minimized, so it should be kept simple, adequate, and timely. There needs to be an appetite for financial institutions to engage, and the implementing partners for the financial part need to be well suited, capable, and have the capacity and expertise required. Also, we see that basically guarantees can be a very useful instruments to provide access to capital, especially when businesses have limited credit history. And in terms of replicability of the use of the financial instruments, what I have presented here is of course very replicable. And what we can say is that grants that cover for incremental costs in the conversion of production lines are very useful to catalyze the decision making towards investments in mitigation technologies. And zero interest rates loans are useful to support market introduction activities and attract end user demand for green products and technologies. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Brilliant, Per. This was very, very good. Thank you so much for the inputs. Very briefly, I'll conclude the points we've heard, and I'll switch then to the Q&A just before handing over to Unido. Akiko, may I ask if you could please take down the slides for a minute, because I think for the Q&A, it would be great to have all the panelists here. We've heard today a few things. First of all, there's a portfolio of technologies required for decarbonizing the manufacturing industry. We've heard efficient cooling in the last round. We've heard low carbon, clean, green hydrogen, how you want to call it. We've heard all other sorts of technologies, also including electrification. This is a challenging, complex sector. And as you've seen, the challenges also require different financing instruments. And I'm very grateful to all speakers, which I hope for the audience was also equally interesting, for the examples they've shared. Now, we have by far too many questions, and I apologize for not being able to share in verbal form the questions with the panelists. I'll only pick 3 of them. And for the rest, as the Interim Secretariat, we promise to share the questions with the panelists over email, and we'll make sure the answers will be reached to those who asked them. First question goes to Luis. It's about the export credits, and I'll just read it for you. In 2023, the arrangement on officially supported export credits expanded the scope of green or climate-friendly projects eligible for longer repayment terms, including clean hydrogen and low-emission manufacturing. So beyond buyer credit guarantees, what other instruments can your organization provide to such industrial projects?
Yeah. We are at the moment involved in a few of these types of projects in the very start, and some of them are project finance, and they're mainly project finance. But now I'm not a finance person. I have an engineering background, but I definitely think there is a lot of ways how these type of projects can be financed. I think they're very creative in a positive way. My colleagues, the underwriters. So there's a lot of opportunities, but mainly project finance we give for these types of projects.
Okay. No, thank you so much. Helpful, and please feel free to share additional information that we can also share with the audience to support your answer. Two other questions, and I'd really like to ask the speakers to be very brief. One question goes to Christian from the IDB. How can decarbonization projects in developing countries best take into account the triangle between financial instruments, state aid rules, and potentially CBAM? Obviously, this is in case of exports to Europe so far.
Well, thanks for the question. I would say CBAM gives us a great platform to operate, because without the CBAM, probably there wouldn't be the incentive to export cement or aluminum or steel with lower carbon intensity. So that's the first one. The second one is that because of that, we are more inclined to the possibility of regulate through emissions or other criteria internally in the governments to go cleaner, greener, and so on. So that gives us that other possibility. But that's not enough. We need the financing muscle, and you need to have that combination, and that's why it's a good question, because in the incentive that not the requirement, not the incentive that is being provided by Europe, the regulation that we can try to enforce at a local level, and the use of climate funds, as I mentioned in my presentation, we can make a change. Now, it's not as easy as to do it in Sweden, where you actually made a new plant from scratch. That will be difficult in Latin America and probably in emerging economies. But you can change parts of the plant. You can change furnaces. You can change burners. And as you start changing the parts of the plant, the whole plant start emitting less. So we can start small. We can use these instruments, and then we can scale it up. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Christian. This was very helpful, and I hope the audience who asked this question received the best answer, which is one of the drivers, obviously, trade, CBAM related topics that are driving also decarbonization. And the very last question would go to the IFC. It's on the role of standards and emission thresholds, which are being applied in different international finance institutions to classify the projects as, let's say, sustainable, near zero carbon, etc. If you could elaborate on that briefly, that would be great. This is particularly important for the second pillar of the Climate Club work. And obviously, as I mentioned, Climate Club is, as OECD and IEA are the interim secretariat, and the IEA team is coordinating that component of the Climate Club on the standards and definitions of different materials. So we want to understand the perspective of the IFIs on this.
No, thank you. I think it's a very important pillar. And the reason why this is important is if there's no differentiation in the marketplace, then one of the incentives for people to do the right thing on the climate agenda is non-existent. we invested in a project in Africa, in Senegal. And it's the first time that, a green loan is being offered to the hard-to-abate sector. The company is going to be producing the lowest carbon cement on the African continent, but there's no differentiation in the marketplace. Cement is cement. Mm-hmm. We need to move to a point whereby parties that makes the effort and spend the money to support the climate agenda have some premium in the marketplace. So we are, at least as part of the work we're doing on the IFC side, we want to collaborate with stakeholders to begin to define what is green, what is low carbon, and be able to put labels on them such that parties who are interested can identify them in the marketplace. We also then need to go one step further in that if we can work with public sector parties, public procurement can start by identifying green products and buying green products for public infrastructure. This is where CBAM is really exciting for those of us who are pushing the agenda and interested in getting the agenda to move forward. Because the marketplace now, through CBAM, will put a tax on parties who are not doing the right thing. And that could get reflected in what eventually gets into the market. But I think at the minimum, we should have a way of putting some nomenclature out there that will differentiate between what is clean, what is not clean, what is low carbon, what is not low carbon. That is something I think is a target that we should all move towards.
Thank you very much, Femi. Very clear. I'd like to close this panel. Matthias, Per, I'm sorry that I'm not turning to you, but there's actually a number of questions to both of you. We'll share those by email because my colleague from UNIDO, Riccardo Savigliano, has been waiting for this part of the event today. He is the Chief Energy System and Industry Decarbonization Unit at the UNIDO. And UNIDO, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is the Secretariat for the Global Matchmaking Platform. And he'll now give some introductory remarks about the platform itself. And I'd like to also ask Akiko to share the slides. So, Riccardo, the floor is yours, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Dega, and I have to admit that my life is difficult now, because coming after such a great panel is not easy. I will do my best. My name is Riccardo Savigliano. I work at UNIDO, as Dega mentioned, and I would like to thank the Climate Club and colleagues in the Interim Secretariat for giving us the opportunity to present briefly what the Global Matchmaking Platform is about. Next slide, please. The GMP, because of course we also like acronyms, so we call it GMP, is an instrument of the Climate Club aiming at accelerating and coordinating international support efforts for industrial decarbonization. So basically what the GMP is aiming at is to link basically government needs and commitments with financial and technical assistance stakeholders. And the platform is going to match governments in their needs for support and activities, and we listed there some of those. In particular in the area of creating an enabling environment, and many of the elements that you read here have been already also explained by previous panelists. So they need to support in getting, let's say, roadmaps, policy frameworks, standards, incentives, monitoring, and comprehensive monitoring mechanisms, and so on. But also very important, what we put it as is to create capacity building to make workable public-private partnerships. And second pillar is to try to support governments to identify pipeline projects in terms of technology need assessments, pre-feasibility studies, technology options, costs, and what is probably interesting for this audience, what the platform is trying to is to de-risk financial investments and to identify sources for securing investment and finance. Next slide, please. So basically, you will get also from the organizers, you will get a better, let's say, description of what the platform is about. Here we try to identify those services that could be primarily of interest for IFIs and the potential impact, at least what we see from the UNIDO perspective. So on one side, the service is going to provide rigorous screening and again screening of countries' requests, meaning also countries' commitments, government commitments. And that would generate as an impact an identification of a solid pipeline, a pipeline of solid projects, reducing the time for identification of those and also reducing the risks for investing in those. So basically, what we believe is that as an impact from the partnership is to increase the efficiency of the mechanism. Then the partnership is going to have a, let's say, a landscape overview and also sectorial focuses, including also identification of key partners and players. That will allow to make investments with a scale-up perspective. So interventions will be not on projects, but on programmatic level. So that we believe could be also of interest for IFIs. And last but not least, probably is the most important element of the GMP is that considering that the matchmaking will start from requests and they say commitments from governments, that will allow to set since the beginning political ambitions, political directions, and that would allow to be more long-term in planning resources. So next slide, please. So as mentioned before also by Philip, GMP started at COP28, and now UNIDO is currently working to make it actionable by COP29. So in the next few months, we are going to pilot the GMP, and as I said, make it available for globally by COP29. So you can reach out to me, to UNIDO, through this email. You will get it also from the Internet Secretariat. We are also together with OECD reaching out to many of IFIs, including, I think, those that were represented today in the panel. So we are trying to basically going to ask which kind of services would you like to see, or would you like or would you consider of interest for your operations in terms of support, resource, data sets, and so on. And which kind of role would you see for GMP in facilitating opportunities for your investments and for your interventions? So what is important is also at this stage is for us is how could we get in touch with each other? How could we go into the details of a potential, we hope, partnership within the GMP. So that concludes my intervention, and Degar, I turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. This is really excellent, and we are very happy to be working with the UNIDO team as the Climate Club Interim Secretariat, so as OECD and IEA, on the development of the global matchmaking platform, and also look forward to further disseminating and showcasing its first outcomes, let's say, at the COP at the end of this year. Indeed, we'll reach out to some of the audience today and also more of our speakers on further elaborating the platform. Now, in the meantime, just before we close this panel, several speakers have reached out to us to ask for interventions. And I'd like to invite, first of all, from the UK government, Josh, to make his intervention, but also to keep it very brief to 2 minutes, please. Josh, it's with you, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and I promise I'll be quick. I'm the head of Climate Multilateral Funds in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero Climate Investment Funds, GCF, Mitigation Action Facility, of which the UK is a major funder. There were two parts I wanted to draw out on here. One was the importance of developing an end-to-end assistance offer in these major emitting sectors. This was a clear recommendation that came out of the breakthrough agendas work that the UK and other countries have been working on since COP26 and again at COP28. It's absolutely fine that developed countries are doing a lot of work, but if we're going to meet our collective climate goals, additional support is required for developing countries. And by end-to-end, we mean everything from that small-scale technical assistance, which is targeted on specialist analysis or the development of strategies, through to innovation, demonstration projects, scaled deployment. In some industrial sectors, some of this is relatively well provided for. For some, there's something in that area. The Mitigation Action Facility, as I say, is a good one where you have that small, medium-sized projects with the grant component. Others are new. The Climate Investment Funds is busy developing an industrial decarbonisation program for this year. But in general, there are gaps in this end-to-end offer. And ideally, we need a full complementary offer where you can have a small-scale project that goes through the system and scales up to success. We've got some examples of this where a Mitigation Action Facility project was successful and is now seeking GCF funding on a much larger scale. So it can work, but we need to do it much more systematically. The second thing is relating to the Pillar 3 of the Climate Club and the presentation we just heard from Ricardo on the matchmaking point. The UK and Brazil launched at COP28 two hubs, one on industrial decarbonisation and one on hydrogen. And essentially they're country-specific versions of the platform that Ricardo's been talking about. So between the UK and Brazil, we're seeking to coordinate and convene a domestic conversation within Brazil about everybody who's doing this, partnered with and supported by UNIDO and Lead It and some other colleagues. And the UK is using its convening power to bring international partners together, whether or not that's funds, whether or not that's private sector, whether or not that's demand-related coalitions, to coordinate those two conversations. There's a great opportunity cost for developing countries to try and access this work, as we've heard from a number of colleagues. And so we're hoping that through these hubs this year and leading on to COP30, we can launch this work plan that we've developed, which says Brazil is trying to do these things domestically on its international decarbonisation, and we can have a conversation internationally about who can support them, who can mobilize that targeted support. So it's coordinated, we fill the gaps, we avoid duplication, and we can reduce the cost of access for the developing country themselves in accessing the support that's available. So those are the two things, end-to-end offer and the matchmaking work. And yeah, it's been great to join today. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Josh. In the meantime, Stefan from the UNEC, if I may just ask for a few minutes of your patience, because few other Climate Club member governments want to intervene briefly. I'd like to invite Paula from Argentina first. Paula, are you there? Yeah, I think you are unmuted now, so we should be able to hear you. Okay, while we wait for you, Paula, maybe I can ask Charlotte from the government of Australia. So you can both go ahead. Charlotte, I think we can hear you now. Oh. Okay.
I think I've just joined. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Charlotte, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Chair. Australia is very glad to be here in this technical discussion, and I'll also extend my sincere thanks to all my colleagues on the line for the insightful discussions that we've had this afternoon, including the interesting case studies on the DFIs and the IFIs and their role in unlocking finance to support industrial decarbonisation. So I'll just take this opportunity to reflect on Australia's efforts in this space, and I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. Australia is taking action to become a renewable energy superpower and build new renewable industries to support our domestic and global decarbonisation. It is a priority for Australia to design domestic policies that attract capital to realise the opportunities of the net zero transition. Our approach is designed to set the enabling conditions for new industries to grow, contextualised within a wider policy plan to deliver our 2050 net zero emission reduction target. And while government funding has an important role to play, we know that catalysing private finance at scale is crucial. So just over a decade ago, tiny bit of history, our government established both the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, which provides early stage grants, and Australia's Green Bank, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Through these institutions, we support early innovation and investment across the spectrum, from R&D to demonstration to deployment. And by the end of 2023, through these institutions, the Australian government had invested more than $15 billion into more than 1,000 direct low emission and clean energy projects, leveraging private investment exceeding $62 billion. With an initial $10 billion capital allocation, the CEFC became the world's largest government-owned green bank and a key institution for Australia to de-risk and accelerate clean energy deployment. So ARENA and CEFC are two examples that we have of platforms designed, grown and directed to scale up clean energy industries in support of our economic vision. We also recently expanded the Capacity Investment Scheme, which is another mechanism to leverage public funds to get emerging clean energy industries up and running and facilitate private sector engagement. So under this scheme, the government will underwrite successful tender projects with an agreed floor and ceiling, decreasing the financial risk for private sector investment and encouraging more investment when needed. We also recognise that domestic resource mobilisation is a key aspect to delivering sustainable economic growth while we decarbonise our economy. This includes considering the barriers to resource mobilisation for industrial growth at home and understanding what factors are preventing private capital from flowing into the creation of new and the transition of existing industries. And it also means identifying the enabling conditions that we can set to unlock financial flows. For example, Australia is looking at domestic incentives that can be put in place to drive investment. So our Prime Minister has just pledged $1 billion in production subsidies and grants to build a solar supply chain in Australia. We've also, the government has committed $2 billion for our what we call the Hydrogen Head Start program, which is to scale up our renewable hydrogen industry, and a further $2 million is committed over 2 years to be provided to First Nations communities to engage with hydrogen project developers. So this program will provide revenue support to large-scale renewable hydrogen projects through a production credit, and this credit is designed to bridge the gap between the commercial gap between the production cost and the sales price of renewable hydrogen and derivative products. Internationally, we also know obviously that all sources of finance need to be mobilised, And we think there is benefit in the club exploring how to support developing countries to create the enabling conditions at home and at a global level that are required to better attract, de-risk and increase financial flows into their clean energy industries. So thank you. We're very glad to be discussing this important issue.
Case of Australia will be very interesting for different economies who are advancing on their industry decarbonization. Obviously, it's a key topic for all, and there's a lot to benefit from what's been on the offer from Australia to support this effort. I see Paula's experiencing some technical problems, so we'll be sharing her inputs later as part of the summary of this workshop. And just before we close, I hand over to UNECE Stefan for his 2-minute intervention. Please, Stefan.
Thank you very much for this workshop and the input provided. Very, very insightful. I'm chairing the group of experts for energy efficiency and the task force on industrial energy efficiency at UNECE. And what I'm going to say is hugely influenced by the work we have done at the EU's Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group and tons of projects across Europe. And that is, if the provision of funding is available on the large scale, as we have seen so many good examples on, we still have the issue that there is the demand side that needs to desire access to that funding. And many of the obstacles that we have observed is that there are so many unknowns. We have heard about the technologies, the heating and the cooling issue, where the majority of companies that do have huge potentials aren't aware of them, therefore aren't seeking for projects for them, and then also have difficulties finding out how to do that. So in data that was gathered a few years ago, we found that even though the majority of companies finances energy efficiency investments from their cash flow, and they don't really seek so much external funding, that was back then, and that was Europe, to limit that. There was something that was much more alarming, that more than 50% on average of companies did not seek or have not sought in beforehand access to support funding for that, for many different reasons. So the question is, why is that so, and how can it be made easier for companies to access that, particularly the medium and smaller ones? And as we are looking at decarbonizing the energy intensive sectors, we should within those also look at what company size is actually the most energy intensive one, and that for most of the energy intensive sectors is in fact medium-sized companies with less than 250 employees. So there is the issue of the perceived risks. If you haven't done something before, it feels risky. And that on top of the unknown unknowns and an often limited investment budget, it's a matter of what do I as a company decision maker put my priorities on, if I can do something that I know about, or if I can have to go into something that I don't know as much about. And I might still be favorable to take climate investments or energy efficiency investments, but if I only have a limited budget, I may have a tendency to do the other intervention. So the decision making under limited budgets, the question of where do I get the skilled personnel and who can help me finding out which programs fit me, particularly the last bit. The smaller the company is, the more that is an issue, because even those funding facilitators want to have their cut, which is understandable. But if the investment sum is smaller and smaller, that percentage cut is so tiny that it's not of interest of the funding facilitators. So that was a super brief overview. There's much more that I have shared in the chat. And we do have an event on the 18th of June where we dive into how to trigger investments more at UNECE with the task force.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan, and also for everything you shared in the chat. Obviously, the participants who are interested on what is being offered by the different work UNECE is doing, they will get in touch with you. Thanks for that again. Now, sorry for the 6-minute delay, so I'll keep the closing remarks very short. Thank you to the team here, Akiko, Yosha, Joseph, and Amelia from the OECD side of the and OECD and the OECD side of the Interim Secretariat for organizing this workshop. Now, we don't need the slides. Thank you, Akiko. I think I'll say a few things on what the audience can expect as next steps. First of all, also thank you to Philip from the BMWK for the opening remarks, and to Matthias, Luis, Christian, Femi, and Per for the great panel discussion, and also for our member governments and other partners who intervened after the presentation that was delivered by UNIDO, and thanks for that also. We'll be sharing with you the slide deck, which you've seen today. As you've seen, it's a standardized way of presenting all the interventions. Because the idea is to collect more of these financing instrument case studies, and by the end of the year, publish this as a Climate Club report. I'm sure that will be of very much interest for particularly steel and cement industries, but also for other sectors in emerging economies, especially how financing can be enabled and with which instruments. The talking points of Philip will also be shared. We are not forgetting that. Now, we've heard about the global matchmaking platform. So the platform which is offering various forms of technical and financial assistance to emerging economies will obviously benefit a lot from what we are learning today and in the coming months throughout this year. So those will be input to the platform, and those governments who are interested to receive support from the platform will be also benefiting from these various, or this bucket of instruments. That's why we are undertaking this exercise here. And there will be more sessions of this sort, addressing different levels of interest and stakeholders in the coming months. As I mentioned, in September there will be definitely another one, but in between you'll be hearing more from us on the progress we are making, with the idea to turn all of this learning into a Climate Club report, and together with the Global Matchmaking Platform, disseminate all of that at the COP together with UNIDO. Thank you once more for the participation from different time zones, and we'll be getting in touch with you through email, and looking forward to the future discussions. Have a good rest of your day or evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Very much.